If you're just joining us, my name is Shannon Jackson, and the gentleman to my right is Daniel Joseph Martinez, who, as you know from your programs, has been making work nationally and internationally since 1978. Some of the most important, provocative, cross-medium work with pieces like Museum Tags, Divine Violence, Deep River Gallery, 100 Victories, 10,000 Tears, The House America Built, Plato Was Wrong, Call Me Ishmael, and it goes on, the incredible body of work he has assembled. And he's also known for being an incredible teacher in the UC system, for being providing a laboratory that is enabling for a number of emerging and already emerged artists, including some in this room. So it's a real pleasure and privilege that he agreed to join us today. I'm really pleased to have you come up here to Berkeley. And we'll start off with what we've decided to call these conversations around irresolvable questions. And in many ways, we thought of this also in putting together the symposium as a little moment to kind of take a collective pause in the symposium, not only to talk with an esteemed person who has lots to say on a lot of issues that have already come up, but also to check in as a group about what irresolvable things have already come up and what we'd like to stay attentive to throughout the rest of our time together. Okay? So that's the logic, and we will talk with each other, but we really do want it to be offer some provocations that will elicit more from you. All right. So I'll start with something that came up this morning when Rebecca was quoting Malik's post on our blog, talking about the odd, equivocal feeling of being someone who works in performance in the art world, and using this metaphor of the fork, of that performance always uses the wrong fork. And it resonates for me in this odd way as someone who, over the last 5 or 6 years, has been sort of trying to retrain myself in varieties of fields and practices and histories that I wasn't trained in as a scholar or critic. And the feeling that all the way along I made so many mistakes and continue to make so many mistakes, or I was told I was making mistakes so many times. And that sort of feeling that even in this sort of cross-disciplinary context where we're working and collaborating across different fields, that odd feeling at the same time that I was getting things wrong. And so I just wonder if you have any responses to that, Daniel. And also, I suppose I want to flag it as one of those occupational hazards of even a gathering like this, that sort of sense that, like, oh, do I even quite fit in? Everybody else fits in, but not me. Is everybody else using the right fork? Should there be a right fork, et cetera?
Okay. Well, first, I just like to thank you very much for inviting me. It's a privilege to be here, and thank you all for coming to the symposium. It's fabulous to have this context set up so that there is the possibility of this discourse, and particularly the frame that you've established in trying to look at multidisciplinary practices, utilizing time-based, performance-based as the sort of center of, say, the spoke of wheels of what an artist might do, but recognizing that there are a multiplicity of manners which we go about manifesting who and what we are as artists. That, I think something important that goes with your question is that I think it's important. My position comes from being just operating as an artist. I think it's important, having listening to the discussions, that we don't set up a false binary that establishes time-based performative works in one category and object-making in another category, as if one or the other gets demonized or somehow put in a pejorative position, having to suggest that it has to fight for its position in the relative, in the larger understanding of the production of culture. That these categories are something we inherited. We've inherited them through the 20th century. I'm not sure I'm sure that they had a purpose at a particular juncture and were very necessary, say through a particular position in modernism. Then as those particular categories started to dissolve, it brings us to the point today where we have entire departments, entire generations of artists where there are no divisions of genres at all, and that people are working in every aspect of production, right? They are working in time-based, they are working in sculpture, they're working in photography, they're working in all these different things. And I think that that's where your fork question comes in, is that we get confused, there's a confusion, myself included, going from having the specificity of languages that are attached to each discipline. For example, my favorite is painters. When you talk to painters, it's a painters, or painters. There's painting discourse, and it's a very specific discourse, and it's attached to a very specific history. And painters are, like each of us in a specific discipline, we're very attached to those histories, and we're very attached to the meanings of those. And I only use painters because I feel they carry the heaviest sort of rock around, you know, if we start with cave paintings and the idea, the ideas of markings, the idea of mark making as in a form of expression, then mark making to linguistics, right, to language. So I think that we often feel that in mixed company, or in a context where I would suggest, instead of using mediums of art making, let's talk about language. So in a context of multilinguality. So for example, if I'm in a space where the majority of the people in the room speak 4 or 5 different languages and move very easily amongst those languages without a thought, and then you have one person in the room who only speaks English, that person starts to feel very uncomfortable because of not knowing, being able to enter into those discourses easily, right? Because they lack the tool of the language. I think that there's a similarity in, hence, when we isolate a medium, that uncomfortability of the fork using appears.
Right.
I think somewhere in there is, I think, where your question emanates from, if I'm not.
Right. And it is also, I mean, when you were saying that, you know, that we're in a place where people are using varieties of media, those divisions are breaking down, have broken down. I wonder, you know, we were talking earlier about a university context. You know, this is still organized by someone who is located in a rhetoric department and a theater, dance, and performance studies department, a history of art department, and a film and media department. And those are useful organizations. There's sometimes we need categories to keep to some kind of structure to be free, as Gramsci says. Yeah. But we also, I do wonder whether it's in the educational context or in other kinds of contexts, what the limits are on certain kinds of disillusion, or who gets to talk to who, or who doesn't get to talk to who, or.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm understanding you correctly, I mean, I do think that in an academic or university context, those forms of cross-disciplinary communications, I do think become difficult. I think there's always moments when you have ambitious students who will move to other departments and start, or are truly multidisciplinary, and somebody working in the dance department, or somebody you know wanting to some aspect of the hard sciences, where they are attempting again to learn multiple languages at the same time. I would say in general it's quite difficult for people to have that ability to do that, and I do think that it carries itself over into the categorizations of the art world, whatever that means. I do think that there is something called the commercial art world. I do think there is something that is a non-commercial art world. I think that there are different support bases for them. I think there are different types of institutionalized spaces and non-institutionalized spaces that are willing to support them. But I do think that there is a tendency for us as artists, again, this is a generalization, but to associate with other people that are, again, operating within a specific vocabulary.
Okay, so maybe it's more language. It's in part language. You've brought it up, vocabulary here and language earlier, that's actually part of it's how people talk.
It could, I think language is directly connected to what people make. So, if you have a genre specificity and you have people making things in particular areas, again, if I'm talking to if I'm a painter, if I'm identify as a painter, and am talking to a sculptor and don't quite understand that, it's again a little bit more difficult. They have to there have to be other ties. This person happens to be actually genuinely my friend, or this person is someone who is not afraid to enter into a critical debate about the efficacy of a particular work or an exhibition, as opposed to you go to view a person's exhibition, something that has always, I might as well just say bothers me. I mean, the sort of question of I liked that show or I didn't like that show. To be perfectly honest, I could care less what you like or dislike. That isn't what I would like you do is actually talk to you about the show. Your like is about what color of shirt you wear. And I guess I don't want to reduce the ideas of art to taste. And we reduce the ideas of art to taste very quickly, and it is done very commonly both in the classroom and outside of the classroom, because taste in the common denominator of, I don't remember forgive me, the woman that was speaking here was talking about the relationship of the objects, capitalism, and how that gets consumed, how the speed of that, and she was absolutely correct. People list art fairs as exhibitions. I find that to be a little strange to me, but it's apparently a new phenomena that is very common. I don't know how you go, for example, in earlier, again, move from, there was a suggestion that we look at in graduate schools for talent. To go from the graduate school, in a graduate department, to making a performance or an exhibition in a museum. I honestly want to know what drugs they've taken in order to create a transition that allows for them, after having one thesis exhibition, the ability to move, to make that transition. It happens. There can be all kinds of possibilities. Everything is possible. I just don't see how we're able to do that, but we do it. Again, I can't not, I can only observe. And I make this observation, and it just seems particularly odd to me that this is something that occurs, Yeah. But so I think it's what we make. The language and discussion around it are two factors, I would say.
Yeah. I wanted to pick up on something that you said earlier around the perils of sort of reifying the time-based, object-based distinction that is definitely a potential hazard of a gathering like this, and it seems like important to make sure that we loosen it. Number one, I suppose the notion that any of the objects actually were not temporal is already perhaps something that people might want to question. But I wonder if you could just amplify a little bit more on the temporal object world and the dangers of reifying this in this discussion, which I think are definitely present, and I want to flag it.
As you suggested on our what we're supposed to be talking about is unanswerable questions, so I would like to maybe just reinforce that.
Right.
Merely opinions. I'm not. These are not by any means any answers. Perhaps trying to think through some of these questions. I think that we've reached a point of what I call open source. We've an open source position on the production of art. I use the term open source the same way that one would use the term open source in relation to writing code. It seems to me that there isn't an incorrect fork to use because there isn't an incorrect way to act. That if we talk about, let's all bring post-studio. I mean,
Yeah, right.
I went to Cal Arts in the mid-'70s, so I studied with Asher and Baldessari and Hubler and, I mean, Judy Fath and all these artists. And it's, the post-studio meant to me something actually quite simple. It meant freedom. It meant autonomy. It meant the ability to move without having the ramifications of the specificity of that particular medium weigh in on you with some pejorative result. That openness allowed then for, again, I think that we're a little bankrupt in language, but I'll use some of this anyway, but allowed for a genuine form of experimentation. I know that we embrace this idea of experimentation. As someone, I was at a panel at LAX the other day, and someone said, everybody talks about failure, but nobody really wants to be associated with failure. And I thought, you know what, there it is. I mean, there's the 50-cent sort of answer to the question is, well, that's actually not true. That if you genuinely want to experiment and you genuinely understand not failure from the definition of it that we use culturally, but simply willing to try things in ways that you believe are experiments, then you have to be willing for the result to be what the result is. Then if you're willing to put that up for display, then I mean, why would you run from it? Because it has not socially been accepted, because the accolades of success by the individuals whom are to move your career, it's always, unfortunately, attached to a career. It's always, unfortunately, attached to a hierarchy. It's always, unfortunately, attached to money-making. It's attached to success. It's attached to fame. It's attached to everything that is antithetically the opposite of what a genuine form, in my opinion, a genuine experimental practice would be. You would, the so-called experiments are just as fabulous as those that work. But they can become one and the same thing. They're not necessarily discursive spaces that we separate out and say, oh, only the good experiments I'm going to accept credit for, and then the ones that fail, oh, those aren't mine.
Right. Right. Maybe we can also start to get into a different conversation if we look at a few images.
A couple images,
Since
okay.
you brought some. We're going to hope it works.
Yeah. Shannon asked me to bring a couple images of projects that where I felt had the most crossover or were in a way not problematic for me necessarily, but problematic internally in terms of structures of different mediums and combining different mediums. So hopefully I've been able to do that. Let's see if this works. Okay. Oh, I got to start. Good. Yeah. It did work. Okay. I would offer this image as this was, I took this yesterday during the keynote. And I think that this just, for me, actually expresses miles of what I'm saying to you. Quite extraordinary red hair. I don't know if that woman is here today or not. Oh, there she is. Yeah. I've become immortalized in here. I think that probably the best place to start is here. This was the Whitney Biennial in 1993. I believe this was radically misunderstood work. This was a performative work from the very beginning, but it was a performative work that truly combined an object and the idea of performance. It synthesized in what I believe really symbiotic relationship that for me worked very well. I'll take you through these because they will express some of these ideas. But I showed you that just because, so you understand the title of the work. This was the first proposal I had given them, which comes from Diogenes. I knew Charlie Ray's truck was going to be out in front of the museum. Of course, the curators did not. I don't know why they didn't take this particular proposal, but they didn't take this proposal. But this was the entirety of the work. This shows the old tags that were used as objects, and then my transposition of the breaking of the language of the sentence linguistically. Saussure was an important influence for me in this particular work. But the work functions, everyone that comes to the museum is part of is a performer in the work. And what happens is that each fragment of the tag takes on new meaning based on the wear of the tag itself. And then as the people move through the museum, you have a complete confusion of the movement of this language. It's moving freely, like air, like atoms. There's countless configurations that take, but so I can't imagine, and then the way that people are dressed, ever wanting, see changes on this black woman than it would be if it were on a white woman or on a Mexican man. These contextual changes, both of gender, of sexuality, of ethnicity, everything that we come to understand within the social space and social matrix is brought to be made evident, in my opinion. To be, right? White, okay? Now here, white seems to address itself directly to identity, but everyone in this room obviously understands that white is a construction. There is no such thing as a white person. We use that language, but it is a construction. It is a false method of identifying ourselves within the culture, okay? This was misunderstood. This is perhaps the point where the performance amplifies itself tenfold. The museum guards cannot wear anything except for their basic uniform in the museum. The guards came to me and said, the museum will not let us wear the tags. And they explained to me why, because I did not understand the policy of the museum. I then went and spoke to the curators and the director, and I said, in point of fact, the guards wearing the tags is not against the rules of their dress uniform. It is actually them participating in the work just like anyone else participating in the work. And after much discussion, they agreed. And so all of the guards in the museum became part of the work in adorning themselves as this particular gentleman in every day in various configurations of wearing the tags. Some would wear just one, some would wear many. They would take it and reconstruct a new artwork by utilizing more than one tag, which a regular visitor to the museum could not do because you only get one signifying the day that you paid to go. So there's a performance within a performance that took place. This one is a good. Imagine gay boys make me hard. I thought was always. These were all taken by the Whitney Museum photographers. That was really kind of great. Here's the third performance that is operative within this context. This is where capitalism enacts itself.
Right.
This is where the cash exchange to enter the museum, to get the tag, to be able to signify, to go to view the art takes place. Very important. I believe this is the performative action of economics, again, as this woman spoke about earlier, I believe right on the money, is something that we need to acknowledge and understand that economic consideration. The same way that Deitch in 1992 was able to enact a monetization of capital in order to change the direction of what went from an art world to an art market. Different conversation, but nonetheless.
We'll talk about
And
that.
this is the disposal of said commodity, right? And then it turns into another performance, which it comes here. It turns into a third performance, or fourth or fifth, or whatever it is, because the conversation extends itself. It's no longer, I am no longer part of this discourse or discussion. They are simply referred to as the tags. They are mentioned in every biennial. Shannon mentioned it again in this biennial. So it moves beyond the artist into something else. So I'll stop there and then,
Okay, yeah. I mean, and just to even notice, like, even the notion of having this conversation, the museum doesn't allow the guards anything. And think about it now. Now every single artist is using the museum guards in their pieces, you know, and that there's a interest, I think that also anticipates, you know, something else that I think bothers or preoccupies many of us, the way that certain kinds of resistant acts eventually end up getting incorporated. And that it, whether it is something that you've already anticipated in the structure of the piece, the monetization moment in that piece, and also the hard knocks taken by you along the way that ultimately now are sort of enabling this practice where security guards are routinely material now.
What's funny you say that, I would only mention that as most people from that either have gone to the biennial, I mean, it was, you know, I took a beating for this. And even I had shown the work looking in New York for various galleries and representation, and people had gone as far to suggest to me that if I were to go through with this work, that basically my career would be ended, that there was no possibility of surviving, producing a work of this nature, and still being able to function in the art world, because this is not what, I mean, I was told this is not what we want to have in our museums. Kind of an extraordinary statement to have, a warning. And again, it's sort of, it's not the way I grew up believing what art ideas were or how our artists were to manifest. Particularly, it doesn't mean that everything needs to be a controversy.
No.
We can work on the sublime. We can work on beauty. We can work on a whole. It's not about a narrowing the range or spectrum. It's actually about how do we broaden it to the maximum degree of effectiveness in producing culture. That's really all. Is that not what we do as artists?
Right. And I think also on the question of career and the way that something like career is hung over one, I wonder if we could use that, which is something you've brought up now a couple of times. I wonder if we could also use that to bring that to a discussion that sort of started last night and also came up again at the panel today around the type of systems or artist-run organizations or different kinds of infrastructures and arts ecologies that might be formed to enable artists, quote, outside, in parallel to, in a modified relationship with the official institution, whatever it might be. Also, just because your own work, you've also, both as an, in your own work, you've been also working on that domain as well, trying to create some other kind of ecology. So it's another irresolvable question, I think, that's come up a couple of times. And I don't know whether turning to Deep River or any other thoughts you might have had along the way, you might.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, as we all know, that the 80s were very powerful time between in this in the development of parallel systems. We saw in particular in New York, the rise of the beginning of a commercial art form. Simultaneous to that, though, there was what we call the nonprofit movement. Every major city in the United States had some form of major art space that was able to provide the opportunity for the works that did not have necessarily gear themselves towards money-making or a commercialization of those ideas, but simply the opportunity to have those ideas exposed. That parallel system was able to create validation both for the nonprofit movement was so strong that it was able to have the artists working within those systems, artworks could be critically examined, they could be validated, they could be respected, the entire discourse around the nonprofit movement, which was strong, was enabling for many artists whom did not fit into the particular moment, the Julian Schnabel, Sally kind of moment of art making that was occurring where sales were starting. We started to see the tip of the iceberg of how sales would function. I think that the culture wars, I think that censorship, I think that towards the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s, we saw a rupture that was where politicians took advantage of art and used it as a tool, which caused a disruption, which in the debate around public versus private funding for the arts and what was pornographic or obscene. This another discussion, but okay, as this happens, but you saw a decline in funding. As a decline in funding, you also saw the dismantling of the secondary system of nonprofit spaces. I think after the '93 biennial, which I would call the last battle, we lost. In my opinion, we lost wholesalely, defeated. And I think that there was a great, or certainly for myself and a lot of artists that I knew, a great disillusionment about that particular time right after the '93 biennial. And what you're referring to, it seemed to me, at that time also, sort of working a lot with Mary Jane Jacobs she was trying to develop a third space by which to articulate a set of ideas, which I think now is very difficult to talk about because of the bastardization of the language and the writings that have been woven around what took place in those particular places with the past, culture, and action. There's a number of moments where I believe that Mary Jane Jacobs, at the time curatorial, was way ahead of her time in terms of thinking about what the institution was allow her to do versus what so-called independent curating could do, which is a term that was not common at that particular moment.
Those independent curating for this in a much more collectivist mode.
Absolutely, and on a much larger scale.
Right.
But energies were going from the artist this way. And it occurred to me in LA that what if we reversed that? What if artists worked for artists? What if artists were able to generate temporary autonomous zones, temporary spaces where there was absolutely no interference from any external source whatsoever in the presentation of their work. And this is how Deep River was born.
Can we maybe, I don't know if the images are in order, but
they're not.
But we can jump ahead, yeah.
Yeah. Here. This was Deep River. Deep River was it was downtown Los Angeles, 325 square feet of perfect, in my opinion. It was completely dilapidated when we got the space. We spent our own money, completely refurbished everything, and I took everything that I knew about a gallery space, like to make it work for artists. Let me see if I have a picture. I want to show you. Sorry. This is important. There wasn't. See this little table here? There was nothing in the gallery except for the art. There was not a desk. The desk was out on the street. There wasn't a phone in the space. The only thing in the space was the art. And ironically, Michael Asher came one time and said this was, it was sort of the ultimate compliment from him, was just said, Daniel, this is the purest of representations of a model for art to exist in uncontaminated. So we sat out on the street, and people would just come, and you sit there and you just talk to people. People would come and have a coffee. People come and just joke around. People would actually want to come and talk about the art. People view the work. I mean, it was one of the, it was a 5-year project only.
Yeah, thanks for, I wanted you to bring that up.
It was very specific. 2 years before the millennia, on the millennia, and 2 years after the millennia, we showed about, I don't know, 60-some artists during that time, if I remember correctly. It was completely funded by myself and 2 other artists, Glenn Kleino and Tracy Schiffman. And so we didn't ask anyone for anything. We simply created an artist-run project that was about showing artists' work from Los Angeles. And we kept it narrow like that in order to keep something practical, so just to keep the budget down, because we had no money to transport or do any of these other things. But it was about, there was a purity to it that was important to us.
Can you talk about what it meant to also put the 5-year cap on it? What it meant to specify that as the arc of the work?
Yes. This is something I learned from watching nonprofit spaces in the United States. Everything has an arc of effectiveness. So everyone starts with the best intentions. And then what happens as years go by, they grow a little, the annual budget grows a little bit. They want to do a little bit more ambitious projects. Some of the board members change, the director changes. And what happens is, I think most of the, I'll just step out on, I think that the failure of the majority of nonprofit spaces in the United States was that they didn't know when to quit. They didn't know when the end of their life was. And therefore, the problematic nature of becoming an institution, which was what they weren't in the beginning, started to be the affliction that brings them down to starting to then act like museums. And it was important that 5 years seemed perfect. Enough energy, the amount of money we were willing to spend, which was, given it, very expensive. But that was energy, enthusiasm, motivation, and something, a fertile place for both the artists, but our openings, I have to say, were fantastic. I mean, they were exciting. They were, people, or even sitting here, people would come and debate. I mean, they would come, put a book on the table. Daniel, you know, you're wrong. Daniel, you're wrong about this. I go, okay, let's talk about it. I mean, that's, I mean, open discourse at what I call just plain street level discourse. I mean, put it out there. I mean, it's simple. But 5 years was very important because I felt that that was going to be the end of our ability to effectively do what we did.
And there's a way that it also makes even the formation of something like this into an art project itself. To decide that, to put a durational limit on it also means there's a character to it that it feels like you're thinking like an artist when you're forming an institution in that way.
Like someone said earlier, you know, about the duration. Someone asked about durational long-term projects.
Yeah, I guess it was me.
Yeah, and this was about, this is a medium duration. I mean, this was, had very, the 5 years was very, you're very correct in asking, I mean, it was very specific, it was very important. And it's an artist-run space, it was an artist project. It wasn't a not-for-profit gallery, it wasn't a for-profit gallery. It has actually there isn't a term that I'm aware of that you can actually apply to what Deep River was, other than saying, which is what it is to us, is it was an artist project, period.
Yeah,
Is it way it would be an exhibition or anything, any other kind of project.
Okay, great. Well, I think we want to turn it over to questions from the floor that might have been brewing. Before I do, I just want to raise this glorious book and encourage you all to buy it to get a broader sense of Daniel's work. And even if you already have that broad sense but don't have its documentation, buy it. So, questions? That might be brewing. Yes.
Will you just talk about the project in Cairo? I know about it, but I haven't heard about it from you.
Oh, Ishmael?
The project in Cairo. The project in Cairo.
Ishmael.
It's the last slides, I
yeah.
think, right?
Let's see, Malik. Is there something specific, or? Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, you and I have known each other quite a long time. Actually, I remember you and I sitting down in front of Deep River on more than one occasion, chatting. I've worked on I've produced a number of these doppelganger machines that are they are live. They're biomechanical machines that that make performances.
Right.
Ishmael here this is actually in Cairo during the opening. Ishmael in this particular position, what he is sick in a sense that it's an epilepsy that he performs for you live. It's he goes completely out of control in his movements, even though they're obviously scripted. It's written like music in the program, so that he will act out a particular performance, but the algorithms of the program are done in such a way that he does not repeat himself. It's not an exact replication each time. What it is, the algorithms change just enough as if it were a human, say, doing the same performance 5 times, do one tonight, do one again tomorrow, do one again. The algorithms of Ishmael would change where it was just enough where it would look as if it was him really performing live. Cairo was extraordinary because there was still a sense of wonder about the work. I'm not sure that the Disneyland kind of quality of what Ishmael represents had been seen quite so directly, but there were 2 responses that were rather, for me, exceptional. One is that people asked me, the room was completely white, the ceiling, everything, and they asked me if this was the transitional space to heaven, because of the glowingness, whiteness of the room, and him dressed in white. And all you saw basically were his hands and his feet and his face, which were dirty. They were someone walking with no shoes, a working class position in terms of what he looked like. The other is that a response was someone killed him. There was no cameras there, unfortunately, or guards at the museum. Someone jumped on my chest, crushed my rib cage, then gouged out my eyes, and then proceeded to try to rip my head off of my body, and left me there dying, basically. And no one knows what had happened, and it's kind of extraordinary response. Ishmael did not take a position to offend anyone, or necessarily to generate that type of response.
But it was different when it was in other places.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, if in the United States or other places.
Or Orange County.
Yeah, the response is completely different. But in Cairo, it was, there was still, again, I guess, the sense of wonder and amazement, which I find we lack a lot in the United States.
Yeah, right.
Is still present there. And, but it was one of sort of the exceptional experiences in my life, presenting him. And I went and did triage, and the United States government actually told me, you don't say anything. You go, you fix the work, you don't ask who, you don't ask why, you don't ask where, you just fix it, you shut up, you leave and you go home. And that was it. I mean, they did not want it to become an incident. They didn't want anyone to know about it. They didn't want anything, right? But these are all, I mean, Amelia Jones has written several essays on the performative biomechanical machine. And seeing these are, I've done, some of you that know me, I've done a lot of live performative work, particularly in the 80s. And this was the transition to doing, still doing performative work, but doing performative work through a different vernacular, a different lens. Ray Kurzweil, you know, thinking about Gene Youngblood in terms of the video phone, the utilization of technology as an asset to the performative action, to build upon the history of the performative, which we saw so beautifully presented at the keynote. Instead of operating in that particular one, what I'm very much interested in is what a 21st century manifestation is. I wonder, how does the artist operate in the 21st century? What is our current vocabulary going to be? Do we continue to utilize the ones that we inherited in the 90s and seem to have not changed into the 2010s? I'm begging for, actually, that we look at ourselves as artists and our production and the language. The 21st century, we are in the 21st century. That doesn't eliminate or deny or suggest that anything else is not possible, but I'm actually just wondering what that one sliver has the potential to be. Because I believe we need to investigate that as much as we do all these other areas. But I don't know if that helps.
I hoped we would have a chance to talk about it, so thanks for providing that chance. Other questions? Michelle?
I guess I just wanted to flag something you just said, because this is just a piece of comment, I guess, but when you just described what happened with this piece in Egypt, it really made my heart pound in my chest, and I don't know if other people had the same response. You said they tore off my head and gouged out my eyes, and we've been talking about objects and performance, and that was a very powerful hybridization of the body and the object, and I just wanted to flag it in our conversation.
Yeah, I mean, again, that's the both synthesis and symbiotic relation that I see between object and performance as operative, as a single manifestation, and its separateness, right? That's why when you asked me about the fork, that's why there's no wrong fork, right? That it's the identification that I use with these is because of the tremendous amount of years and labor that goes into making this. When Disneyland made Abraham Lincoln, I don't know if you remember, I mean, you all must. Abraham Lincoln was one of the very first attractions at Disneyland. It was at the cost of $10 million. Okay, Abraham Lincoln, to just take his hat off and stand up, okay? This is put together with chewing gum. I mean, we're talking, this is on very, very small comparatively, budgets. So there's working with Ishmael, I become him. He is me. So I mean, there are several. Like I say, there are several of these. There's one based on Mishima. This one happens to be, based on Moby Dick. I mean, the references come from all over different places. But there's one of me committing suicide. I mean, the self-identification is not dissimilar to the history of performance. We can start talking about all kinds of individuals in performance and the both durational performances. My friend Nigel Rolfe, when he would put thistle around his head, or when you would inflict pain upon yourself, not to torture or hurt yourself, but the fact that one is it's a purification process, a theological, a philosophical belief system. These machines are not just a machine. This is not a machine. This is something very different than that. And again, I don't have the language for it, but you're correct in, I identify with them all, and that's maybe part of Malik's of question also, they were me. They are me, right? And, you know, there's a trilogy. There's a third one. I just haven't been able to, based on a Goya painting. I just, you know, I'm slowly, you know, one little part at a time right now.
We have a last question? Yeah.
So to continue on about sort of artist identification and long-term projects, and to sort of return to the Deep River, when you were talking about the project, I assumed it was an artwork.
It is an artwork.
Okay, but then something Shannon said sort of made me a little confused about whether it was an artwork or, and then you referred to it as a project. So to return also to the question of language,
right.
I'm wondering about the terminologies that occur in the discourse, specifically to visual art, but now to performance, that distinguish between an artwork and an art project. Because it seems to me, you know, it may not seem like a big difference, but if we look at kind of what's implied by a project versus what's implied by a work, there's a lot. There's a lot there.
Right.
So
right.
if you could.
I wouldn't disagree with that. I think you're right. I think that they're both very complex words, and I think perhaps my answer to you would be that Deep River embodied both. Deep River was a medium-term length project because of its necessity to be conceived of over this 5-year period and how it would be able to act and perform, because it very much acted and performed as a place. Simultaneously, because of the physicality of it and because of the necessity to take something that was completely destroyed. It was, see, Deep River is connected to a piece of architecture, which Julie will know very well, which is called the American Hotel. The American Hotel is a very, very famous hotel in downtown Los Angeles, which was very well known during the punk years. Contained inside of the American Hotel is a place called Al's Bar. Al's Bar in the United States was one of the most famous punk locations, period. So what I have is I have multiple levels of physical activity that take place combined with the representation of its architectural objectness as a thing. So I have a building that's a piece of architecture that has a performative activity that contains this very famous punk bar. The hotel itself is a transient hotel, which was almost like a heroin hotel for the sake of that, the way it was sort of got known. Very small rooms. And in the corner of that was, in that history of that object, was Deep River. So the same way that Richard Serra and Frank Gehry, where Richard Serra would say to Frank Gehry, "That's not art," and have this debate about architecture versus the objectness of art. Deep River was a built object. That built object was part of a project. That part of a project was part of a history of architecture that was a series of performances. The performances that took place inside of Al's Bar, the performances that took place inside of those little rooms of hotels, because there were art shows. There were regular performance art shows. Al's Bar was famous. It produced art. It produced punk music. Everything you could imagine was produced. Is a venue, one of the great non-institutional venues. When nobody would go downtown. I mean, people were afraid to go downtown. Okay, and so the same architectural performative activity, Deep River had a small portion of, which was this little tiny corner. So it is both an object and a project. And I think the complexity of those words, I think is actually a much deeper, and I think you're spot on the money as a discussion. But I would say both. Yeah.
Daniel, thank you so much for making sure we're attentive to this, for sharing your objects and your projects and your work with us.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. This is a great event. Shannon.
Mwah.